Okay, hi guys. Today we will also be looking at a micro CSQ. This case is especially targeting the price mechanism chapter. So this is useful for students in J1 who just finished the price mechanism topic not long ago, or for J2 students who want to revise your price mechanism chapter. Okay, this case is put from one of our students, WA. So you will see scribbling around, but no worries, we will highlight the important points so you can follow. So if you see the previous video on the elasticity case analysis, you will see that we have a suggestion of how you can approach your CSQ, because for CSQ, time management is very important. So we always try to maximize the time we have and reduce areas where you will take time. So our suggestion then was to, when you first receive your CSQ paper, what you should do is actually to read the question title and also the case title. So rather than when you flip open the paper and you read the content straight, try not to do that. Firstly, because when you read the content, you will not be able to very targetedly know what you want to read. So it will create the situation when you finish the cases and then you go and look at the question and you come back, you have to reread the case because there are just too much info when you read in the first place. So the tip here is to understand briefly what the case might be about by reading the title and then going to the question, and after knowing what the question wants, do some planning and then come back to the specific case so you know what to look out for. So this is the best way to save your time. Don't be too worried that not reading the case will affect how you will interpret the question, because how you interpret the question is actually based on your command of the concepts, less of what is in the case lah. The case eventually is for when you have structure and plan some points to cover in your answer, and then you come back to the case to see any information that you need to add on or adjust a little bit, but never rely on the case solely for answer, because it is not true that the extracts will have all the answer you need. It wouldn't be so easy. Okay, so without further ado, let's read the question. So this question is a 20 mark CSQ question. It is not the full CSQ mark for paper 1, because for paper 1 CSQ is actually 30 marks each. This is for the purpose of building the student up for promo for the chapter, so it is 20, but eventually when you are taking your promo, you should generally receive the full case. So usually the structure for promo is 1 30 mark CSQ followed by 1 or 2 essay question. Yep. Okay, so let's read the title of the case first. So here talks about liquid gold, the economics of maple syrup and honey in Canada. So every time when you read a case, it is good to know, for example, which country it is talking about, which specific market. In this case, it seems like the good and service that you are looking at is syrup/honey, and it's in Canada, because when you are very sure of the market that you look at, eventually the question when they ask about the price or related indicators of the market, then you know what it is talking about, because there will be times when the market is actually on A, but the question could talk about the derived demand for factors of production of A. So for example, if you want to produce your cake, then the question may talk about the market for cake, but some question may then ask you about the market for sugar, for flour, which is a derived demand of your finished product. So you need to be very clear whether you are looking at the same market lah. So this is just something to note because we have seen some cases where they mix around. So need to be very clear. Okay, then let's go to the first source, which is table 1. Maple syrup and natural honey production in Canada. Okay, so noted that we talk about generally for cases you don't read first, but if you have data that don't require you too much effort to decipher, you can briefly look at what the data covers and to look at any trends that you can observe, because then for the data part is quite fast compared to the extract with the long paragraph that can be quite content heavy. So data tend to be more focused as well, so it's okay to analyze a little bit at this point. Okay, so when we talk about your production, we are talking about your supply. So sometimes when you see words like that, it is good to denote some of the concepts that could be applicable. So in this case, supply, so you will frame your mind to think about it. Anything about supply that I can talk about. And this is across time. So we see that the time period is 2019 to 2023, which is 5 years. And let's see any trends that we can identify. So there are 2 products here to be very clear. So one is maple syrup, one is honey. So I would think for maple syrup and honey, the source of the material and the production may be quite similar because both are condiments for your dessert and they are likely to be quite close substitutes. So these are things that you can keep at the back of your head when you read through the case, because sometimes they may ask you about the relationship. How does one impact the other, for example? Okay, so when we see the maple syrup production across 2019 to 2023, we see that it generally falls because you have 13.2 million in 2019 and 10.4 in 2023. So it means that generally across the 5 years it has decreased. But nowadays questions are less straightforward than that. They will ask you any other trends that you observe. So actually you see that for maple syrup, between these 5 years there are still some fluctuation, especially in your 2020 and 2022. So it is good to point this out if the question asks. So look for the more detailed trends within the general decreasing trend. Okay, then we look at the honey production on the right column. So overall, the honey production seems to have increased across the 5 years, 86 pounds, thousands of pounds in 2019 and 95 in 2023. So here is a general upward trend. And also let's look for any little fluctuation in between. So you see that in 2020 there is a fall, while in 2022 there is also another fall. So there is something interesting that you can see here across the 2 products. So you see that in 2020, maple syrup and natural honey both have a little fluctuation, but for syrup it is higher, while for natural honey it is lower. So it could further imply that there is some substitution relationship going on, where in years when you consume more maple syrup, you consume less honey, etc. Which also seems to tally with the general trend where maple syrup overall decrease, but natural honey overall increase. So these are things that you can infer from the data, and especially when they put 2 products side by side, the question will likely ask you to establish some sort of observation or relationship. So you can take note of this later on lah. Okay, I think this is enough for table 1. So we move on to extract 1, reading the title. Okay, so they talk about the role of technology in maple syrup production and export. Okay, so when we look at certain phenomenon, we can at the same time identify if this is a demand or supply factor. So here when you see the role of technology, we learn that this is a supply factor where higher technology adoption helps to increase the supply generally because it improves productivity, it encourages higher production yield, it makes the production process faster, requiring less raw material and reduces cost of production, things like that. So here you can be expected to apply how technology could help. And furthermore, yes, about production and export. So this is again about your supply area. So something to look out for extract 1, this could be a supply dominated extract. In this case, you can expect that subsequent ones will likely talk about demand, because when you look at price mechanism, you always have to look at two sides, demand and supply. It will be very, very rare to be just about one side, unless it's a 2-mark question that just want you to say demand or supply factor. Otherwise, it will be usually requiring an analysis of both to see how then it affects the market for a certain product. And in this case, do highlight that this is maple syrup, because the case seems to mention maple syrup and honey interchangeably. So you need to be sure, is this talking about which product, not to be confused. Okay, so let's read on for the extract 2. Okay, so here extract 2, troubles in the maple syrup industry. So again, this is about maple syrup. From the case, the title, we can't really tell what is the coverage of the case, but it may be something that talking about how the industry is facing some challenges. So challenges, it depends. It could be, say, supply shortage, because this is also disastrous, right? When you have supply that cannot meet the demand, you have shortage, leading to some people being able to access the product and some couldn't. So shortage is an issue. It's a possible reason. And on the flip side, it could be demand too high also, or too low. Because if your demand is too high, then again you will have shortage because supply cannot keep up with demand. Or if your demand is too low, then you have surplus, where supply is a lot more than demand, and this may thereby lead to shortages. So when you see questions like that in the title, do think of possible scenario that could be happening. So later when you read the question, you will have some idea. So do start to think about the concepts as you read the case title, and rather than look at the question and think of something, because by then it may be a little bit hard to think of the answer. So always think about concepts as you read through the case. But of course, this is a best effort basis lah. If you can identify, good. If you can't, then you can watch on to see how we do it. Okay, so because this case is not a full one, you see that there is only 3 data points. So one is table 1 and 2 extract. Typically, a full CSQ paper of 30 marks, you would expect about 3 to 5 the paragraph extract and about 2 to 3 data. So this is a shortened one. But we can see how then we apply. Okay, yeah, for this part there are quite some annotation happening, but I will try to differentiate my annotation through highlights and color, and later on go through the points in this blank page later, so at least we can take a look, because this is a PDF copy lah, so cannot remove the annotation that was made previously. Okay, so for the question distribution, we see that it is a 2 4 3 2 1 8 allocation. So this is still quite okay, quite gradual. The only difficult part is the 8 mark, which likely has your evaluation because you have action words like discuss. So this is about the need to have different views to the claim. But for the others seems to be quite factual, applying your concept. So let's go through one by one. For your micro case study, over the years they start to mix quite a bit of the topics within micro. So for example, you no longer see a full case on just price mechanism or just on market failure or just on your market structure. They tend to mix a bit. But this case is especially for price mechanism. So if you want to really understand how to apply the price mechanism concept, then you can consider this one. Otherwise, for the other ones that we focus on, it will be a mix of the topics. Okay, yeah. So let's go to part A. Okay, part A, 2 marks. Compare. Okay, so we always highlight the action words because the action words is what you have to fulfill for the question. So it could be compare, comment, describe, explain. In this case, compare. Compare what? Compare the trends in maple syrup and natural honey production in Canada from 2019 to 2023. Okay, so this is what we have went through just now when we look at table 1. We saw that maple syrup and natural honey are compared side by side, and there is a difference in how their production volume change over the years. So again, make sure that you, when your answer is mentioned, there is this comparison aspect. So you could talk about, for your maple syrup, it decreased over time from 2019 to 2023, while for natural honey it increased. So cite some data to support what you mean, because here the question didn't say refer to table 1, but in your answer you could say that. So let's go down to the blank page where we can compare. So this is a 2 mark, so we can compare using 2 points. Each point should give you 1 mark. Okay, so this is for your question A. Yes, question A. So for question A, compare. So compare, you can look at a few ways. You can compare to see the similarity, or you can compare to talk about the differences. So of course, if you can, try to give both, but it depends on the table data as well. Sometimes you can only look for similarity, some you can only look for difference, but since it's a 2 mark, make sure that you have 2 points. So the first one we saw is that for your maple syrup, overall it decreased from 2019 to 2023. This is for your maple syrup. While overall, for your honey, it increased. So do include the data to say that it increased from X to Y. Then this is the same. Decrease from X to Y and increase from say A to B. So cite the information, then talk about how you have derived this from table 1. So when you compare, always go broad, then go deeper. Okay, so this is your first mark. So for the second mark, you can talk about the movement, the fluctuation in the production volume for each of the product across the 5 years. So when we go back to table 1, okay, so just to recap, because sometimes we will forget the details, so it's okay to refer back. You can say that for maple syrup, it in between it experiences 2 sharp increase. So one is your 2020 and one is 2022. On the opposite, you can say that there's a decrease, these 2 points. So your 2020 as well and 2022. And to note that actually 2021 to 2022 for both product, the change is quite big. Here you see that the change is about 5 million. Then here the change is about 14,000, which is quite significant overall in the production volume. So you can say that these two experience fluctuation in these 2 years, but the fluctuation is in the opposite direction. So here you are looking at a point that is similar but yet different. So be specific. And this is good. The examiner will like specific comparison rather than just say, oh, both have fluctuation. But actually when you realize, you look deeper at the fluctuation, there are some differences also. So you can say that in 2022, in 2020 and 2022, both have fluctuations. So the fluctuation usually means that if we are going on an overall trend upwards, then if there are dips, right, these are fluctuation, because then you will dip and up and dip and up. So this is a fluctuation. The same for if you are going generally on a downward trend. If you suddenly down, then you have up, down. This is also fluctuation. So you can use this as a term to talk about that. So the fluctuation for your maple syrup is that in its overall trend of decreasing, actually you have increased in these 2 years. Whereas for your honey, in its overall trend of increasing, you have dips in these 2 years. So talk about that. And you can quote the numbers as well. So where is it? How much is it? Then it will be enough for this 2-mark question. So essentially you are saying that both are moving in the opposite direction in terms of the overall trend as well as their fluctuation. Okay, so this is done for your part A. Okay, so this is still quite okay. Usually students, they will tend to lose mark at the second mark, because talking about the general trend is easy, but if you want to talk about the details, it would be a little more challenging, because you need to observe deeper. You need to find a way to compare. Yeah. Okay, so second question, part B. Using the evidence in extract 1. So very nice, they tell you which extract. Explain how. Okay, so again we highlight the action word explain. Explain how the concept of XED, of demand, might be used to estimate the extent of the impact on the demand for maple syrup in response to an increase in the price of honey. Okay, this question is a little bit long-winded, but if you break it down, essentially it is trying to ask you, how do you use XED to explain the relationship between your honey and maple syrup? Because if you look at the second part of the question, which is might be used to estimate the extent of the impact on the demand in response to a change in price of honey, essentially this second part is the definition of your XED. So if we go down to the screen, our part B, sometimes we can do a content recap, which is a good thing when you do application, because you will be able to look at the content again. Because sometimes when you answer certain question, you will realize that actually I am not very familiar with this content. So it will also inform you what you are not so clear on. Then you can go back and read. Okay, so for XED, we recap. It is about a relationship between a change in demand for good A when there is a change in price of good B. So here the important thing is you have to determine what is the relationship between these two goods, because this is the only elasticity concept that talks about the relationship between two goods. For your PED, PES, and your YED, they talk about the one good, the demand or quantity demanded of one good due to price and income change. So that is quite specific. But here you need to look at two goods. In this case, we have been looking at the case earlier. It talks about honey, maple syrup. So these two are the relationship pair. So you have to determine if they are substitutes or they are complements. Because when they are substitutes, the XED value will be positive. Because when your two goods are substitute, when your price of good B increase, people will switch away from it and go to good A, so it's positive. Whereas if you are complement, then when the price of good B increase, then the demand for A will fall because both are being used both are being used together lah. So one will affect the other. So you need to be very clear what's the relationship first. Then later on you can then interpret what the value tells you. So in this case, we will need to calculate, because unless the question say unless extract 1 mentions it lah, but then we might need to calculate. If it didn't tell you the value, you might need to calculate and then interpret, or you can just take the value directly. Later we will see for extract 1, but then explain how it will be used to estimate the extent, right? It will be in terms of the value of the XED. So if your value of your XED is very high, it implies that the numerator is high. Math, right? Higher the numerator, the higher the value of that fraction. So if you calculate the XED to be high, then it would likely imply that the extent of change for the demand of your numerator is going to be high. So we will see what extract 1 says, then we can deduce further from that. Yeah. So we can look at the information on XED first, then we can come back to structure our answer. But here at least we know what we are looking at, which is the XED value, and then that will tell us the extent on the demand for maple syrup. Is it high or low based on the value? So let's go to extract 1. This is a 4-mark question. Typically, if you look at the previous CSQ on elasticity concept, there is a similar question on XED, which is also 4 marks. This is because you need a few information to explain, so they give you more marks. But the bad thing is if you miss the information or you don't know how to apply, then you will lose more marks lah. So it is good that for elasticity concept, try to score because it is quite a standard. Okay, but let's go to extract 1. Okay, extract 1 is a little long, but let's see. Okay, so extract 1 is about the supply one. So let's read the case. Every time when we read the case, we try to see what we can deduce from the concept so that we don't need to come back again and read it lah. So the principle is try to read the extract only once and annotate the key concept. So when you need that to answer certain question, you just have to look at your annotation rather than, I have to read again. This will waste time. So this is a time management technique that you can apply. Okay, so here they talk about maple syrup is a natural sweetener that is commonly used in food and drinks. Case study, they tend to tell you some context of the product, so you know how it relates to the market and stuff lah. Because some product you don't really see in your notes, but you need to know how to apply. Okay, so they say the maple syrup is made from the maple tree sap, which is collected and then boiled down to create the thick syrup that we know and love. Okay, so this is from the saps of maple tree. So products that are very reliant on crops, on weather, right, we need to be careful because the supply may be vulnerable. So say if you have a drought or a flood, then your supply could be very easily impacted. So we need to can take that in mind. Okay, so maple syrup is sometimes used in place of honey. Okay, this is a very key phase, because this actually implies that both are substitutes. Okay, so this is what we have established, right? They are, when you see from daily life, you will know that both are quite similar lah. Although the taste is different, but the use is very similar. So they are substitutes. So when they are substitutes, your XED value will be positive. But the magnitude of the XED will then tell you how close a substitute they are. Okay, so we read on. So they say both are natural sweeteners, so they can be used interchangeably. So this sounds like they are quite close substitute because they are used interchangeably. So this implies that to consumer, they don't make such a difference. Okay, then they say they have similar texture, similar nutritional property. So this further hints at you that this is a close substitute, because they say they even taste similar and they feel similar. So they are trying to tell you that these are close substitutes with your XED is likely to be high. Okay, so now they say while maple syrup is a popular product in many countries, Canada is the world's largest producer and exporter, and in recent years, technology play an increasing important role in maple syrup production and export. So here is what we have talked about in the extract 1 title, which is that it impacts supply, typically increase lah. Unless you have a destroying of technology and stuff, then it will be negative impact. But this is not very common. It will typically increase the supply. Okay, let's read on. So one of the most significant tech advances in maple syrup production is the use of tubing to collect sap. Traditionally, sap was collected by tapping and hanging a bucket. This method is labor intensive and time consuming, as the sap has to be collected and transported by hand. Hence, tubing allows sap to be controlled more efficiently with less labor. This is also helping to increase the production as well. So maybe last time, one tree can produce 1 liter of maple syrup. Then you need to tap. And based on how well you tap and how much you tap, then you can get a lot. But this tubing system seems to enhance that process. So maybe 1 liter you can collect like most of it compared to last time. So this does seem to increase efficiency and the amount that you can collect, and with much less labor. So probably you save time, and this will help to increase the supply. So this paragraph mainly tells you how it works. The tubes are connected to a network of pipes that lead to a central collection point where it is stored and transported and processed. That said, besides displacing some workers, there is the concern that when discarded, the plastic tubing can break down into microplastic and contaminate this. This is interesting because apart from talking about the supply side, this also seems to imply that there is some relationship to your market failure, negative externality. So things like that you can catch and write down, because maybe the question may not ask, but at least if they ask later, you can write about it. Then you don't have to come back again and find where is the negative externality. So you can good to highlight this along the way. Okay, then from the collection of sap to marketing and distribution, tech has made it more efficient, sustainable, profitable. Okay, so this is still talking about the benefit of the technology, which we know in detail from previous paragraph. And as the demand for natural and sustainable food products continue to grow, it is likely that tech will continue to play a significant role. So here tells you a bit about how the demand is also increasing to meet the supply, and this makes sense lah. Can imagine how the maple syrup industry invests so much in technology, so they would have known that there is some increase in demand going on. Cause no point ramping up your supply when you feel that there's no demand, so no point. So the demand and supply is likely to increase. And when you come to this situation, actually sometimes you can think of how will this impact the market for maple syrup? Because we learned that when you have demand and supply shifting in the same direction, which in this case it is to the right, the impact to the market may be a little bit indeterminate. So for example, you have your demand supply here, then this is your initial equilibrium, then later on your supply and your demand shift right, then you have a new equilibrium. So in terms of the impact to quantity, it is no conflict. Your quantity increase, but the impact on your price is indeterminate because you have one going up and one going down. So I feel this may be something that the question will ask later. They may ask about what is the impact to the price? Then you have to say, is demand growing faster than supply, or supply growing faster than demand? Because when you are able to show the different extent of shift, then you can have a conclusion on price. But let's see, this is just a assumption lah. So whenever you see the demand supply curve shifting in the same direction, you know that something is going to be indeterminate. Then it is good that you are able to have a conclusion on that. So we keep this in mind. Okay, then we can answer the XED question already, because here keep talking about information that hints at both are strong substitute. So you can say that how you can use XED to estimate the impact is that based on the extract here. Okay, let me use a different color. Based on the extract, it seems to imply that they are strong substitutes. So you can quote the case to show evidence where it keeps hinting at them being strong substitutes. So when you quote, then after that you say that this implies that the value of the XED is going to be positive and high. Because when this is positive and high, you know that then the impact to the numerator is going to be high, which means that when the price of your honey increase, then the increase in demand of your maple syrup is going to be high also, because of the high XED value. So this is how you answer part B, because we have already we explained how CED can estimate the extent. So we say that this is being explained through close substitute, then the value of XED is high, and then this tells me the extent of the impact on the demand, which is big also. So you conclude by saying how you use the concept of your XED. Okay, then this should be sufficient for your 4 marks. Yep. Okay, so it's actually quite straightforward, but you need to make sure the thought process of you breaking down the concept and applying is very clear. Okay, so we look at part C. Extract 1 also explains how tech advancement have helped to contribute to more efficient production of maple syrup and likely continue to do so in the future. So yes, we read and we know that the extract 1 talks a lot about how tech help to manage the increase in supply. So let's see what questions they test. So you see here for part C, there are 3 subparts under it, part 1 to part 3. So likely you need to answer these 3 parts in relation to extract 1. Okay, so let's see what the questions are. Okay, C part 1, using a PPC, explain the likely impact of further tech advancement in the maple syrup industry on the productive capacity of the Canadian economy. Okay, so this is talking about how do you use the tech advancement to talk about whether the Canadian economy is more productive or not. So we know that from the extract it says, yes, the technology advancement make it more productive. So that is a conclusion, but C part 1 is asking you to apply PPC to show how this is achieved. So the likely impact we will have to identify, is this increase or decrease, and explain lah. So how do you use PPC to explain? So here when we draw the PPC, this is a 3 mark. So we will have to draw the PPC, the curve 1 mark. Then we know that from content, when you have higher productive capacity, you shift out the PPC, so that is 1 mark. And you need to explain how the tech advancement allow a higher production per unit of time. Then talk about, is it increase or decrease? So the answer structure that we are looking at should be like that, where you talk about, okay, my C part 1. So you draw your PPC, make sure that you label correctly. In this case, you can have the axis to have both. So one is your maple syrup, one is your honey, because these two are the products that are being mentioned. So you assume that the Canadian economy produce 2 products, because in PPC we are always comparing X and Y axis, product A, product B. So in this case, because there is context given, so you can just label them on your PPC. So PPC, we know that it looks like that. So for a economy, they cannot produce beyond their PPC unless you shift out your PPC. So you need to draw an initial versus after situation, where you say that, okay, this is your initial point of your production ability before the technology advance comes in. Later on, when you have your implementation of your technology, then this causes your PPC to shift out. So when you talk about the PPC shifting out, you need to show why, because now you can produce more maple syrup. Okay, maybe we draw the cross in this way, because we are not sure whether the honey is affected. So you show that with the technology, now you can produce more your maple syrup, which is at level A to level B. But here we assume that the level of honey produced remains the same, because we don't have information. But showing how A can go to B explains for how your PPC shift out. Okay, so this should be your 2 marks. You talk about how the PPC shifts plus why do you think so? Then you can quote for the case to say that, oh, it enables higher productivity, and the example of the tubing actually gives you more maple syrup collection. Then your remaining 1 mark will be, how does it impact the productive capacity? So you must say the increase in the tech usage increases productive capacity, because now per unit time the production of maple syrup is higher. Because when you shift the PPC, it doesn't directly link to the productivity aspect. You are just saying that per unit time I can produce more, but this actually translates to increasing productive capacity. So you can mention that clearly in your answer. Okay, so that's for C part 1. Then for your C part 2, 2 marks. Okay, explain. Okay, so here the keyword is explain, so we highlight. Explain the opportunity cost associated with farmers choosing to stick with traditional sap collection methods instead of switching to modern tubing system. Okay, so here the concept of opportunity cost we will explain a little further, but let's see what is the outcome of the question. So to make it into simpler term, the question is asking you, when farmers choose to be traditional, what is the thing that they give up? compared to when they use the technology. So as we see, we have look at the extract one, and it talks about the benefits of using the technology. So if the farmer don't do that, they will lose out on the higher amount of maple syrup that they can collect. Because if they choose to be traditional, then we see that, traditional, you use the tapping method, then you will not be able to collect so much maple syrup and you spend a lot of time. So that is the opportunity cost that came up. But in the first place, you should explain what it means by opportunity cost. So opportunity cost, we talk about what is the next best alternative that you give up from an action. You need to say something that you give up, which is the next best opportunity that you give up. So next best opportunity that you give up from performing something. And in this case, when the farmers choose to use the traditional method, they give up the higher possible yield volume of maple syrup that they have, and also maybe they could have rested more, because this talks about the traditional method being very labor intensive. So if you use technology, you can rest more, for example, and you can collect more. So this is the thing that they give up. So do talk about it and why lah, because this is explained. When you talk about the thing that they give up, this is actually identifying. So we have to explain. Okay, so when we go to the planning below, see part 2, this is what we should say. So we say that for the farmers who choose to be traditional, the opportunity cost is the higher yield of maple syrup and lesser work hours. So for the explanation part, you just say this is evident from your extract 1. Where they talk about, then you take the relevant extract, because you say that if the farmer continue to use traditional method, then they give up the use of the tech, which brings them this benefit that is foregone. So use words that shows that you are applying opportunity cost, because a key term is foregone. What do you give up when you choose to do this instead of the other thing? So this is quite straightforward, because the answer is in extract 1. So that is the situation where, okay, the extract does tell you all the answer, but it isn't the case all the time. Okay, so we move on to your C part 2. Okay, 1 mark. So when you see 1 mark, it is usually stating something, define something, explain a trend, which is low impact lah to your total mark. But of course, it's something that if you can try to score. Okay, so they say state a possible unintended consequence of switching to using tubing system to collect sap from maple tree. Okay, so this is interesting, because in extract 1, we didn't see like a bad thing. Okay, usually for most of the time they talk about the good stuff, but the bad part is not explicit. But when you look at the end of extract 1, remember we highlight the point that talks about it. There is a potential negative externality that is there. So here, the way this question is phrased is a little subtle, but they say unintended. So you will recall that unintended is negative externality, right? Because you didn't expect that this activity has an impact on third party, people who are not involved in the process. So this further confirms that what we highlight just now is applicable, because when they use the tubing system to collect, then the intention is that, it will improve productivity, improving yield, reduce working hour. But the unintended consequence could be when the tubing is being broken down it has impact on the environment. And I think there is something also that we didn't highlight in specific, but it's talking about laying off workers. So I think you can choose either one, but I would prefer to use the tubing one because the unintended consequence seems more substantial. So let's go back to extract 1 to see in detail what that is. So here they talk about they use much less labor. Okay, so I highlight in a different color. This is also an unintended consequence because on one hand you are using technology to replace the need for your human labor, and then you could increase unemployment in the industry. Alternatively, you can also say this: how when the plastic tubing break down because it is made of plastic, it has impact on the environment. So I prefer to talk about the second one because this seems more severe. So your point could seem stronger, but I think talking about any is okay. Just state one lah, cause it says state possible. If it says state the possible, then it could mean just one. But here is a possible, so I think you just choose any one is fine. Yep, so this is straightforward. You just say the unintended consequence is either I increase unemployment in the industry because now the tubing system replaces the need for human labor. That is one. Second one is you say how it breaks down and pollute environment. So these two are still okay. Okay, so we are done with our, out of 12 mark, we have done our, out of 20 mark, we have done a 12 mark. So this is okay because seems so far the first 5 parts A to C is quite straightforward. So do try to score, because if you get 12 out of 20, you are actually getting already a B. Yeah, 60%. 60%. So if you want to get an A, actually you just have to get 14 out of 20, which is like 2 out of 8, which means actually you don't even need to pass your part D, but in front you should get full marks, then you can get A already. So this is usually try to score the part before the 8 and 10 mark, because they will really help you to secure a B or an A, because usually students, they will tend to not do so well in your 8 and 10 mark because that involves your evaluation, which is harder to tackle. But here we can talk in detail, that's okay, and try to get better at that lah. But the in front is the content that you need to know, so all the more you should score. Okay, so last part, 8 marks. So for CSQ, last time the 8 mark is not evaluation question. It is more of factual. So explain, elaborate, state, all these things is a concept application. But across the years, the CSQ started to be more evaluative. So your 10 mark always have evaluation, that is a given. But your 8 mark now also most of the time is evaluation. So how do you tell? You tell from the action word. So discuss, words like discuss, access, compare, comment, all these are questions that need you to have a viewpoint. So in this case, expect some evaluation. So evaluation usually for an 8 mark question, it will take up about your maybe 3 marks, which is quite substantial. So if you don't have evaluation, you are capped at maybe a 4 or 5. So with evaluation, although may not be very good, you will still get 1 mark or 2 marks. So do try. If you cannot evaluate very well, then just try something and improve from there. But better than if you don't write lah, because you don't write, then you don't have that skill. But this is very important, especially also in your paper 2, your 15 mark. 15 mark essay always have evaluation, and if you don't have evaluation, you can lose up to half of the 15 mark, which is quite a big damage. So take this opportunity to build up your eval skills. Okay, let's look at the question. Discuss the likely impact of the events in extract 2. Okay, we haven't read extract 2. So this is look at the event. So events means what? Events means things that happen, and likely because this is a price mechanism question, your events will be things that relate to your demand supply factors. So because events happening, we know that they shift your demand, they shift your supply. Then you need to use your factors to say, hey, which aspect of supply and demand they affect, then which direction. Then you can combine to talk about it. Okay, then so how does the event impact the market for maple syrup? So when you look at the market, the impact on the market, this means either price or quantity or both, because when you draw the demand supply graph like that, for example, your maple syrup, depending on how the demand supply shift, for example, like that, right, you will still have an impact on the price and quantity, because you are restricted by the graph to only have conclusion in these two aspects, because it's a 2D graph and it's price and quantity. So if you use the graph to analyze, you can only derive the impact either price or quantity. So you need to know the outcome, which is how would the things in abstract 2 happening impact the price. And if you say the impact on price, then it will be, the conclusion is either is an increase or a decrease, increase or decrease for your price and quantity. So have that conclusion, and it should be like that. So discuss the impact, you need to have a view. You cannot just say, oh, demand increase, supply increase, then stop. You need to conclude. That's the point of the graph. You need to conclude what is the before and after equilibrium. And at the same time, if there is any impact to price, then you use the price adjustment process. So in this case, we can take a look at what are the possible events. And it given to be a 8 mark, it will mean both sides, demand and supply, are being impacted. So the important thing is to identify what direction the demand supply changes and because of what, and then what is the impact. Okay, so that is the structure for your part D. Okay, so we plan. Yeah. So 8 marks like that, you need to write more definitely, because it is a 8 mark. So here, okay, 2 thin. So here you talk about first, what's the demand supply factor. Then you need to then conclude, is this an increase or decrease, and why? Because you can't just say, oh, this happened then demand increase. You need to use the factors, like example, for demand increase, a shift in taste and preferences towards maple syrup, for example, or increase in income. Then for supply, you can say the use of technology increases the willingness to supply, things like that. You need to explain. Okay. Then just now when we look at the case, remember we talked about a possible situation where your demand and supply actually move in the same direction. So if there is any conflict in direction, you need to talk about the extent of the shift. Then this is a way that you can conclude the impact. So talk about the extent of shift. There is a difference and you have to justify why. Then the third step is to conclude. So what is the impact on your price and quantity that is being transacted? Price and quantity. What is the after? So you need to say for both, is it increase or decrease? Then you can conclude. Okay, so we look at abstract 2, and then we look for these things, because now that you plan, it's very clear what you are looking for. Demand factor, supply factor, and how does it contribute to give me a conclusion on the direction and extent of shift. And then you put them together on the graph and you analyze and explain. Then it should be enough for an 8 mark. Okay, for extract 2, this is a bit better. I think it's slightly shorter than extract 1. So yes, have the end goal in mind. Look for demand and supply factors. So here, when sometimes the question tells me where to look at extract whatever, right? I will write what I want to look for next to my source. Because this reminds me, sometimes the extract can have so much info that I may end up forgetting what I want to look at. So when you write here, it's very clear lah. Because sometimes the case may play with your mind. They give you something that is not so obvious or not so relevant, then it may distract you away from your true objective. So the planning is very important because it keeps you on the goal of the question. Okay, so let's read. Canada's maple syrup reserve, okay, so this is about a supply, has reached a 16-year low, raising questions about the future of a globally loved sweet staple in the face of climate change. Experts link the shortage in the reserve to both a rise in demand and warmer weather, which has disrupted production. Okay, so this is clear. Here they talk about the supply fall because of warmer weather that decreases maybe they kill maple trees, your sap, or maybe the warmer weather actually decreases the production of maple syrup. So when you use the tubing system, you only can have that amount. And also a rise in demand. So this probably leads to the problem of shortage because you have lesser supply and yet you have higher demand. So the shortage happen. So here what I may conclude is that the increase in demand may be faster than the decrease in supply. So this is even worse because the supply is already decreasing, yet my demand increase. So I can read on to see more things lah, but this is what I can conclude for now. Because the rest of the case is still quite long. Okay, then Canada's billion-dollar maple syrup industry accounts for 75% of the world's entire production, which is quite huge. So imagine one country taking 75% of the world's production. So any disruption to that is actually very substantial. So any disruption has a high impact on the supply overall. Affects supply a lot. Okay. Then according to national data, a majority, 90%, is produced in the province of Quebec, where the world's sole strategic reserve is set up. Okay, this one also important because I'm not worried where it is produced. It's more of I want to know the impact on supply. Okay, then they talk about maple syrup production, which is typically done between March and April. So actually this maple syrup production works on a very critical time, only 2 months of a year, March and April. So all the more you need to seize the opportunity to extract as much as you can in that period, because I think otherwise you don't have the production. So this is even more critical. And if now you have climate change, right, then it is worse lah, because it's already so precious. Yet during this precious period is being disrupted. So you can expect the supply to be hit quite a lot. Okay, so they talk about the production relies heavily on a delicate balance of freezing overnight temperature and warmer daytime temperature. So they talk about how the cold temperature blah blah blah, while the warmer temperature blah blah blah. Okay, so here says that at night the temperature need to be very low. In the day, the temperature need to be higher so that it can facilitate the production. But here they say that warmer weather across the country. So this means that even at night, the temperature is quite high. So this is disruption to again the supply. Actually, this case, a lot of it is talking about how the supply is being disrupted. So just elaboration. That's why I read through faster lah. Okay, last paragraph. coupled with the poor harvest years, again, they keep emphasizing on the low supply. So the supply, you must say decrease. It's a rising demand. Rising demand, because it has been talking about supply. So now I need to talk more about the demand. Especially how do I link increase in demand to the demand factors, because now it's not so sure yet. Okay, then blah blah blah. Some deputy director of the company says that the growth in demand is tied to Quebec's efforts to promote syrup and its benefit. Okay, and how syrup is a healthier alternative and vegan, unlike honey, blah blah blah. So all these advertising efforts on the benefits of maple syrup can increase its demand. So you can say that the demand factor is a shift in taste and preferences, because maybe people now want to be healthier, so they see that, oh, maple syrup is healthier, so I shift my diet, shift in taste and preferences towards your maple syrup, so it increases your demand. So you see how here we have established the direction of shift of your demand and supply and the factors. So now what you need to do is you just have to combine them and then show on the graph how it impact price and your quantity, and it should be enough because you have already discussed the impact, which is increase or decrease and how. Okay, so how do you structure your answer? Here you can give the examiner a flavor of what's the flow of your content. Okay, so here I will erase the top so I can have some space to write the answer. Okay, I erase because I want to keep the bottom one as a general flow. Okay, so we erase like that, should be enough. Okay, so we talk about number 1, your demand. So my demand, we know that it increases based on taste and preferences shift. Then you must say why is there a shift. Then you can say Quebec has a high marketing effort. So this marketing effort changes people's perception of maple syrup towards consuming more. So you need to explain a bit more, not just enough to say, oh, they market, then increase in demand. You need to show how this links to the taste and preferences part, which is the link between the advertisement and the increase in demand. And you can say that when the marketing efforts is quite successful and substantial, actually the demand increase a lot. So show the extent plus direction. Okay, then the second one is supply factor. So supply, we know that it decreased, and this is due to your weather condition, your external condition. In this case, be more specific weather condition. So you talk about how the warm weather actually reduces your yield of your maple syrup, and then your supply decrease. And because the climate is a relatively large scale, so you can say that actually the maple syrup, the supply is impacted on a large scale. So you show that the extent of the decrease in supply is high, then demand increase is high. Then with that, you can combine to your demand supply graph. Okay, let me change the color. Okay, I will use black. Okay, so draw your axis P, Q, then label. So this is the market for maple syrup. Okay, spell it out in full lah. I don't spell full here because it is no space. But here I draw these two. My demand, my supply. Then draw your initial equilibrium Q0, P0. And then show how your demand and your supply shift. So your demand should shift a lot, D1. Then your supply should also shift a lot, S1. Okay, let me draw it a bit better. The axis I can extend lah. Here I exceeded a little bit. Yeah. So you see here, the way I draw it now, the impact on price is clear. It is an increase in price, but the impact on my quantity may be indeterminate, because when I shift my demand right, supply to the left, then it is like both direction, increase and decrease. So I don't know what is the extent of shift. So I would think that here you can define the extent of shift. In this case, I would like to say the supply shift more than demand, because still the demand, although the marketing efforts are quite high, but you need time to change people's mindset. So I still say my demand increase, but it increases at a slower rate than your supply. So your supply will increase a lot because it is hit by the warmer climate. So I show it is obvious that my supply is shift left by a lot. Yep. Trying to join the graph. Okay, then in this case, you see that the impact on quantity is very clear, because now I am able to show that actually overall my quantity fall. This makes sense because you see the global supply fall. And although there is a higher demand, but if the supply cannot meet, then the quantity consumed is still lesser. So the impact on price is that the price increase, but the quantity fall. So here, before you make that conclusion, you need to include this important process called the price adjustment process. So this price adjustment process actually just explains why the price increase. So this price adjustment process, how do you do it, is that you see the new price, you see the original price, but you extrapolate it to the new demand and supply curve. In this case, okay, let me zoom in, because now your original price is P0, but your new curve is the pink one and the green one. Okay, the way I draw maybe cannot cut. Okay, let me adjust this a little bit. So my supply should look like that. Okay, so my demand I keep. Okay, it's a little bit disjoint. Then my maybe then my demand need to shift even lesser. So my supply, I can see the difference. Okay, so my demand supply, then my demand I shift just like that. Demand 1, then my supply I shift here. Okay, I can still show the difference. It's still okay. Okay, so how I start the price adjustment process is to show that if the price don't change, it remains at P0, then at the new demand and supply curve, I will have a problem. So it's either a shortage or a surplus. Then in that case, the price has to adjust such that I reach the new equilibrium where the surplus and shortage is gone. So how do I do it is I identify the original price P0, then I go and see where does it hit the new demand and supply. In this case, it is here QD and here QS. So when QD is more than QS, I have a shortage, which makes sense because now they say globally increase in demand but decrease in supply. So you need to say at P0, QD more than QS at P0. So this impact is that there is a shortage. So to close the shortage, my price needs to adjust upwards. So they usually say there is an upward pressure on price. Because when you say there's an upward pressure, then you show that price increase eventually. Upward pressure on price, and then your price adjusts to P1, which is shown on the graph here. Okay, make it more obvious. So my purple one. So I see that here I have a P1 where the pink and the green graph intersect. So now you have a conclusion already on your market, which is that my quantity fall and my price increase. So this is what you have to include in your answer. So here we have concluded that, yeah, our price increase, our quantity decrease. So you have discussed because you have a conclusion. So this is good. You always have to conclude. And judging by the length of this essay, maybe it's one page, maybe 1/3 or 1.5. So this is enough for 8 marks. So you see how we answer is very clear, very succinct. We don't beat around the bush to say, so many demands, supply factor. We just pick one each and we justify the difference in the shift, the extent, the direction, and then we just explain the price adjustment process and talk about the impact on price and quantity. So this is enough. This is a complete answer. So you should be able to secure your 8 mark. Yep. So yes, we have completed the case. So this is good. Yeah, usually our session will be about slightly over 1 hour because we are really focusing on the content, the application, the thought process. So if you like to speed it up, you can increase the speed, or questions that you already know you can skip. But however, this is the full content and usually we go through in sequence. So yeah, this is the end of the session. So do give us some comments because this is a new series. Let us know anything you want to know more or see from the next videos. But here we try to go from the start. So the previous one focuses on elasticity application. Then now is the demand supply factor. So it quite nicely completes the chapter. And we will move on to market failure and the most feared micro topic, market structure after that. Then slowly we'll move to macro. But perhaps the next session we can go through essay also. So you can see the difference in how you apply the skills. Okay, that's all. Thank you for watching the video and we will see you next session. Bye bye.